Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Doherty Institute, and on behalf of the Convergence Science Network partners, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening for our presentation, Artificial Intelligence, the Machine Learns Healthcare. My name's Luan Ismail. I'm the Executive Director and Convener of the Convergence Science Network. This evening we're fortunate to have one of the world-leading healthcare informatics experts to share the future of artificial intelligence in healthcare. Mark Heinemeyeer is a seasoned hospital and healthcare system executive with numerous appointments, having recently been the Senior Vice President of Nant Health, a cancer therapeutic company created by Dr. Pat Soon-Chong, whom some of you may have heard of, who's also been a driver behind the precision medicine initiative announced by President Obama. Mark has recently joined the advisory board of Melbourne-based psychiatric pharmacogenomics company CNS Dose. This is Mark's first visit to Australia and first public presentation. So please give him a warm welcome as he comes to the lectern to deliver this evening's address. Mark.
Well, it's good to be home, which may sound strange, but I had an epiphany just a few weeks ago. I was hanging out with a couple of blokes in where were we? Utah, I believe. Someone came up and immediately knew that I was from the States, whereas my associate was from here, and it was because of how I pronounced my name, Mark. And I immediately realized, my God, I was born Australian. Because when I was a kid, I could not say Mark. I said Mark. And my friends and family and relatives and my parents' friends just got the biggest kick out of the fact that I couldn't say Mark. I said Mark. And I said Mark for years until I got a tape recorder and trained myself to say it wrong. And I've been saying Mark all this time. Now I realize I was not only born talking like an Australian, but from the time I've spent with associates from here and my week in Melbourne, I realize I actually think a lot more like an Australian. So it's good to be home, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much. I was first asked to talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare, which I will, and then subsequently I was informed that some of you would find it helpful if I talked a bit about commercialization of healthcare technology and AI technology in the US, because some of you may be interested in doing so or may be doing so now. So I'm going to sandwich in between some AI stuff, I'm going to sandwich in some commercialization tips as it relates to the US. How many scientists do we have here? Okay, great. How many philosophers? Okay, yeah. How many robots? Just one, okay. All right. Let's see. So, and I know we have some folks who are here just out of curiosity, want to know what is this AI stuff? What is artificial intelligence about? So just a couple of quick level-setting slides. Human intelligence is obviously the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, or as Carl Sagan put it, the ability to perceive an unpleasant future and hopefully avoid it. So those are a couple of definitions of human intelligence. Artificial intelligence has many different definitions. It's cognitive systems, it's cognitive technology, it's computer systems. People use different terms that you may be more or less comfortable with, but it's to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And things like visual perception, things like translation of language and technology, decision making, those kinds of things. Okay? And what is machine learning? Machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence that enables a system without programming to teach itself and learn and grow. We often call that we're training the machine to be able to perform things by providing it more and more data as opposed to programming it. So what's the ecosystem look like? This is from Gartner. This is one way that they display what the ecosystem of AI looks like. And so we'll take a very quick look at this in terms of ranging from deep learning and recommendations to natural language generation, prescriptive analytics. I don't need to read these to you. You see machine learning up there. Evidence-based is a very important part of it as it relates to medicine. So this is one view of the ecosystem. And a more common view is this, because we're all still really trying to understand it. And everybody has different perspectives and thoughts about what artificial intelligence is. What we do know is that AI is both the top trend and the next big battleground. Why do I say a battleground? Well, because there are concerns that AI represents, a combination of machine learning and big data and automation that can result in the obsolescence of humans. So there's a concern that could lead to our obsolescence. You mentioned Elon Musk, as well as Stephen Hawking. There's also a concern that it could result in the creation of a superhuman, super intelligent life form that could attack and subrogate and destroy humanity. Or, go back to my friend here, or that it could be a companion. Something that provides a respite from loneliness, entertainment, assistance, et cetera. Self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, something we've thought about for many, many years. How many of you, if I was to say, I will give you a brand new autonomous vehicle for the next year, and you just have to park your current one, but you get this free vehicle for the next year, how many of you would be up for that? Okay, it's a little less than half. And why is that? What do we worry about? Safety. Okay. Enjoy driving. Yeah, exactly. When we look at safety, how many deaths occur in Australia as a result of distracted driving? Anybody have a guess? I don't even know. But in the US, it's the equivalent of a 747 coming down every 2 weeks. So so when you think about safety, we think about the different things we do and rely on computers. How many of us would like to fly from here to Los Angeles in an aircraft that didn't have computer-assisted pilot and land, fly by wire and assisted landing and all of that? Okay. So there's something around this issue, and then when we think about it, this is what we think. This is what we picture. It's what we are afraid of. Okay? My office is in San Francisco, and I was up there one week, and there was an accident in Silicon Valley. A Tesla rear-ended a Google autonomous vehicle. Okay? So it's interesting and it's entertaining, but after spending time on the Google campus, seeing many, many videos, I would feel much safer personally in a self-driving vehicle when the technology and infrastructure supports it than I do trusting myself or our son or daughter driving me around town. This is an example of utilizing machine learning to get a view of what's going on in artificial intelligence. And this represents about 850 companies across the landscape that have received venture funding in the area of artificial intelligence. And I was going to take a little deeper dive into some of this, but in the interest of time, because of everything we have to cover, I wanted to share this with you. This is a tool called Quid. And Quid is a San Francisco-based company that scrapes data from investor reports, analyst reports, websites, media, and organizes that and identifies common language and organizes the world such that I can do searches. I may want to do a search around competition for my company or for my client or in an area of interest. And it correlates these things and clusters it, and then you can drill in and look at these different clusters. From the standpoint of efficiency, in just a few minutes I can do what typically would take me a long time, and I would miss a lot based on what I needed to see. So this is one way that AI helps us understand what's going on, whether we're looking for investment capital, we're trying to understand the competition, we're trying to look for a company or solution provider that may have something that we need for our own business purposes. Okay, I'm going to jump now, based on that, into my little sandwich here of talking about commercialization in the US. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because these are very dense slides, but they'll be available for folks. So these are sort of tips. I've been involved in commercializing 4 different companies incubated in academic medical centers, as well as other early stage companies. Worked with companies out of Europe. I've come into the US. And as was mentioned, I'm now involved with a Melbourne-based company, which I'm very excited about. And so when I think about the US and things that might be helpful to understand that may or may not be that different from other markets, but the US has generally been pretty innovation-friendly. They're willing to try things. Also, physicians have a little more autonomy, and they're willing and interested and kind of excited about trying something new, even if maybe they're not quite supposed to yet, and going off label with things. Consumers are more used to paying for innovation. So it's a culture where we're used to paying more to see a specialist. We're used to paying more or paying cash for certain services. If there's an opportunity to get the most advanced diagnostic for my child or my wife, I'll pay for that. So we're a little more used to this thing, and we're always looking for that. You can start small. You don't have to start at the enterprise level. You can come in more of a boutique solution, see if you can get traction. Domain experience is pretty important. We find that in the US, healthcare decision makers, they don't get out as much as they'd like to. And so if I've been traveling around talking to CFOs or CTOs around the country and I come to meet with you, if I can bring you some of what I've learned from talking to your peers and what they're worried about, what they're thinking about, what they're in the midst of doing, that's really interesting and beneficial. And all of a sudden my value to you marries up with hopefully the solution I want to talk with you about. And there's a higher perception of value in terms of engaging a trusted advisor. It doesn't mean you have to be that person, but it means that you need to do your homework, and it would be of benefit to you to team up with someone to gain some of those insights and be able to bring those with you. Not just be a product expert, but to be really a deeper business expert. It's not one market. The US is 51 markets, so you need to think about that. There are probably in 60, 70% of the cases there's relative overlap, but there's healthcare is local, it's considered local. There's regional preferences. You need to understand those, and at the very least, if you have the opportunity to have a toehold in key regions in the West, the Northeast, the Southeast, Texas is its own country. That's important to the buyers. They want to feel like you understand and appreciate the rhythms of care in their community. Timing matters. Really, it does. Looking at the trends, looking at the hype cycles, and then moving quickly. If what you've developed is in alignment with the trend and the hype cycle, move quickly. Get going. Don't wait to perfect it. Get in the market. Get in play. Get the design finished and get out there. Obviously, interoperability, since the mass migration to electronic health record that's gone on over the past few years. You have to be able to work and play well with those key platforms or with others. So having that as a competency. At one time, that was actually a product and had value. Now it's considered a checkbox that you really have to have an interoperability hub to be able to do business. Inspired genius and scientific breakthroughs are, of course, essential. But you really have to lock arms with your marketing team. And so the scientists, the engineers, the alignment is critical. And I've been in one of the most brilliant organizations in the world with incredibly bright people and remarkable technologies. But lack of alignment was a critical failure factor. So that alignment is critical. Some quick comments here. Opportunism is okay. Get a quick win. Be prepared for the fact that you may not get the customer you were looking for. You're going to get the one you least expected. And be prepared to engage with them. Recognize that the market market segment you were going after, maybe it's the market segment you know the most about, or it's the market segment that inspired you to develop this solution. But you may find that there's an adjacent market that actually really needs what you're doing and is much more prepared to adopt it and may need some configuration to fit that market, but go for that. So be ready for the wrong people to want your product, and don't get obsessed with gaining that reference account. You should be pursuing it. That's a strategic objective, but it can take a long time. They move slowly. There are a lot of barriers. Sometimes you can crack those sooner than you think, but don't get obsessed with getting the reference account. Get obsessed with getting in business, getting some traction, and proving that out. At some point, you have to convert, of course, from opportunism to being very market-driven once you've gotten a small portfolio of clients. Use fresh language. This is just a huge bias of mine. Don't copy the competitors. Don't use buzzwords. Try to come up with a unique way of talking about what you do. Borrow language from another industry. Find fresh ways to talk about it, and you'll immediately intrigue and interest folks. Healthcare purchasers, like anyone else today, are much more consumer-driven. They're used to an Amazon-like or an Apple-like experience, and so if you can position yourselves to look and feel a little more like that, it's obviously an entertainment culture, so if you can somehow position yourself to be entertaining, have some fun with that. And then, really important, make getting started easy. Have a phase one solution. Have a way that they could start benefiting from some aspect of your solution tomorrow without having to disrupt a current vendor or a current work process. Have a phase one way that they could start immediately getting some benefit without having to take any huge risk or major disruption or make a big financial commitment, and then you're in a position to land and expand. Evidence-based wins. In healthcare, so you really, I don't have to say much more about that. My bullet points underneath are a little off. Be fresh, let's see here. Here we go. Let me talk about hot areas in healthcare. Very quickly. These are hot areas. I don't need to talk about all of them. Just wanted to show them to you. These are hot areas. Again, I don't want to take a lot of time, but I'll give you a second to look at them. Ranging from post-acute care, big deal. Not just here, but there in terms of the cost and hassles of that, and the impact on individuals who, post-acute care, for those of you not in medicine, is folks who have been hospitalized and gone home, and then oftentimes wind up back in the hospital again and again. And each hospitalization takes its toll on them and on the economy, and so there are major efforts going on to try to reduce that. You see off to the left, artificial intelligence, so cognitive applications, chatbots, robotic process automation, et cetera. And of course, personal genome analysis and related services. Let's talk a little bit about, how many physicians do we have here? Okay, great. This is a really exciting area. I'm going to talk for a minute about surgery from the standpoint of kind of going back to the self-driving car nervousness. When it comes to medicine, how many of you would prefer to have robotic or robot-assisted surgery? Okay, quite a few more of you. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? We have that impression. Now, an interesting comment about that, what do you think about older adults, seniors? How do you think they would feel about robotic surgery? You think they'd be yay or nay? Yeah. I attended an event in Reno, Nevada, hosted by a destination hospital in California, doing a roadshow with what's called the Mako robot, an orthopedic robot. that is used in joint replacement surgery. And they were putting on events for seniors and filling up rooms with seniors coming in from Palm Springs and elsewhere to see this demonstration. And they actually had the seniors get up and volunteers get up and actually manipulate the robot and shave some bone and do that. And these folks, they loved it. They're excited about going and getting robotic surgery. Why do you think that is? Made them feel safer. Somehow it made them feel safer. And it made that surgical process seem less subjective. Seemed like it would be an objective experience to them, and one that because they could see it and touch it, it was extremely effective. I've spent a lot of time in the area of neurosurgery with chiefs of neurosurgery. I was involved in developing some surgical navigation systems, surgical safety platforms, a command and control center for surgeons, et cetera. This is an example of utilizing surgical navigation to more precisely perform surgery and to guide that location. Just wanted to share that with you as an example of something. This is another example of this is what a robotic surgical suite may look like. Or does look like, excuse me, for those of you who haven't seen it. The other famous robot is the Da Vinci robot used for prostate surgery. Again, a very sensitive, emotionally sensitive surgery. And so the sense is that men would feel perhaps a little safer, a little more comfortable knowing that it's robotically assisted surgery and very precise, potentially. I'm not commenting on the effectiveness of these devices in real-world medicine, but only on the perception that folks have. And in the case of the Da Vinci robot, many, many health systems and hospitals bought Da Vincis over the past few years. And it wasn't necessarily driven by evidence-based medicine. It was driven by defensiveness, that if the hospital across the street has a Da Vinci, that's where people are going to go. So I've got to get one. So major expenditures were made to invest in the Da Vinci robot. But again, the evidence is still controversial as to whether it's really better medicine. How would you feel about taking a pill, a robotic pill? These are being utilized for a few different things. Sort of an upper GI evaluation, an entire GI evaluation, also pills that you can take that will tell somebody if you took your pill for medication management. Population health. Looking out for the population and what are the trends going on and what are the risks is a huge area. It's for machine learning and predictive analytics. For a health system or an insurer or an employer to understand the health of their population, who's at most risk, and therefore what should I be doing to potentially intervene. So looking at population health is a major use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is an example from a company that I worked with, Lumiata, out of the Bay Area, a very sophisticated venture-funded firm that is able to analyze a population concurrently and or retrospectively, identify based on clinical data and claims data a risk profile on that population and be able to suggest who's at most risk this year versus next year versus a 3-year risk. Now, in the States, health systems use this to capture more revenue because if they can look back on their population and say, oops, we had a higher risk population than we thought we did, we had undiagnosed chronic conditions, then they can gain greater reimbursement for having those individuals in their population. The flip side of that is that information winds up getting shared at times with healthcare providers, but not acted on as much as it could be to actually take preventive action. So we go from population health to more precision medicine, where it's all about the individual. And it was mentioned before that I worked with Nant Health, which was really all about looking at cancer from the standpoint of 30,000 rare diseases, looking at the individual in terms of their specific mutation, not the body part where the tumor may reside, and in simple terms, identifying what chemical intervention might be most effective with my mutation, even if it's a drug that might have been used for breast cancer or other purposes. So we're moving more and more into celebrating individualism, and also with a rapidly aging population. So the issue of chronic disease and how to address that becomes very critical. So one of the ways we address that is by looking at different courses where we can get folks to follow a certain path. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but one is to utilize machine learning, an app that we developed called My WANDA for women that let women know that they're at risk of heart disease well before they demonstrate that, and help them pick a track to help prevent that. Trial and error in medicine and in life it represents risk. That's part of what, obviously, a big part of what precision medicine is all about, is what can we do to get it right? When I was in my early 20s, I was misdiagnosed with 2 different terminal diseases. It changed my life, and it set me on a mission around the importance of getting it right, and because of the impact it can have, and secondarily, obviously, then identifying the most contemporary and appropriate treatment for a condition. In that vein, as mentioned, I've had the opportunity to be on the advisory board for CNS Dose, which is a Melbourne-based company focused in the area of depression, and really trying to overcome the tragedy of trial and error prescribing when it comes to depression, and especially treatment-resistant depression. So some questions for us to think about. I think I'm going to depart for a second here and come back to that. Before we talk about what should we do, why do you think machine learning and robotics and artificial intelligence is kind of daunting to folks? What could that represent for our society and our population? What comes to mind? Pardon? Loss of control. Okay.
I think objectivity. Objectivity.
Objectivity.
So instead of having an individual analysis, you actually have it across a wide class of people.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to toss out a couple of other thoughts. I think many of us look at the rise of artificial intelligence as, in some ways, another industrial revolution. When we think about the rate of change over the past 30 years, it's amazing. It's boggling. But when we think about the rate of change in science and technology over the next 30 years, the brightest among us, would never probably be able to effectively imagine that, much less keep up with it very effectively on their own. There are 80 million people in the United States with an IQ of under 90. Okay? In the 1960s, that was okay. An IQ of under 90, you could find a job, you could have a career, there was plenty for you to do with an IQ under 90. Not so much today. In the late 90s, offshore arbitrage, labor arbitrage, was a big problem. And we hear now, President-elect Trump is going to bring the jobs back that left during that arbitrage. But now it's not labor arbitrage. Now it's really about technology being able to take over much of the mundane work that someone with an IQ below 90 could do quite easily. And what are we doing about that? And those individuals feel left behind. And they're starting to rebel, and they don't like this. I think it does help explain, finally, for me, what's gone on in the States and the backlash against. I was joking with my wife, the whole Hillary Clinton email server scandal, right? I wondered if I walked down the street in any American city and asked 10 people what a server is, how many of them would even know what a server is? But it sounds evil. And she had it in the basement. You know, that's frightening. Right? Anybody have a, so you know, I just wanted to kind of touch on that because there's a bit of a war on stupidity that's arising out of this. And I don't know that that's necessarily fair, but I think we have to recognize that that's potentially, you know, part of what's going on, and what can we do to address that? So I'll move back to this slide, which is, you know, really what should we do? Well, we should do everything we can to make artificial intelligence environmentally friendly. What can it do to help us address issues, not only of things like global warming, but terrorism, crime, war, those kinds of things. We need to make it human-friendly. And what does human-friendly mean? You know, in the words of Immanuel Kant, you know, it means making sure that humans are treated as the end, not the means, in this process. Make AI stupidity work for human intelligence in some way. And really what that means is we have to face the fact that AI is going to make many, many jobs obsolete, but it's also creating others and elevating potentially the value, the net value of our society. And what do we do about that to take care of the folks that can't keep up with it? I don't have the answer, but it's something we should be thinking about. You know, make AI's predictive power support dignity. What do I mean by that? Well, my CTO with WANDA came from Google. And what was his job at Google? To develop the ability for Google to anticipate my next search. So that's what he did. Think about all the things that occur through a marketing and product promotion perspective that impinge on us. Think about all the garbage that shows up and we're exposed to through our various searches. So there's an intrusiveness there that you know, really at some point starts to impact our human dignity. And then finally, you know, can AI make us more human? I think that's our responsibility to remain human and leverage it and look at ways that AI can really support humanity. So I want to talk about one other thing here, which is the premise on which AI is based is not creating machines that can replace human decision making, but to really make it more precise, more accurate, more timely, hopefully more insightful, and that by virtue of that, allowing us to actually use and access levels of information that we were not designed to store, much less know how to access. So to utilize that to augment our capabilities in some of the areas I mentioned and in others we haven't thought about. So that's what I guess I would like to share with you as a closing comment in terms of thinking about AI as something that is enabling and empowering each of us to hopefully keep up better, to be smarter, more efficient, more effective, make better decisions. In the world of medicine has been facing a tsunami of data for years. The good news is there's more data than any physician has ever had before. That's the good news. The tough news is they're accountable for it. And so how do we assist them in making that actionable and useful? It's a daunting scenario, and that's just in medicine. So with that, I think I will wrap up so that we have time for questions or commentary. I appreciate it. I hope that there's a few things in here that were of interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ken Parker's my name. Just being a tiny bit sceptical and perhaps realistic, just considering two things. One is that we haven't really got very far with e-health, with actually enabling even the currently available information to be used with the currently available techniques. Even today in Melbourne, doctors cannot access the information that they should be able to. And one other point which might seem unrelated, that the United States is still isolated in its imperial standards. Given those two things, if we haven't even got to the stage of addressing those two fundamental, almost ancient issues, can we realistically think that all this wonderful potential that you have opened up to us is going to be realised in the short to medium term?
Well, I think you've made an incredible observation. I don't know that I have an answer for your observation. I'll join you in that observation. For example, prior to the sort of massive adoption of electronic health records in the US, most of the health systems, and UCLA being one of them, had many, many best-of-breed solutions. And so each discipline was able to pick their best-of-breed solution. And they felt pretty good about that, but they didn't necessarily talk to each other very well. And in my case, for a surgeon to prepare for surgery, he had residents going around printing off documents from these different things and putting together a booklet, or dropping them into PowerPoint slides so that he could try to get a more holistic view of Mark. So one of the things we developed was a platform that would sit on top of those and collect that data and allow that surgeon to display the information that they most wanted to see, however they most wanted to see it, at different stages of a case, whether it's a consult, whether it's pre-surgical planning, whether it's intrasurgical, and be able to access all of that and actually be able to answer the WHO checklist accurately with real information available. That all went away with the EHR, and one of the things that happened, of course, to physicians is that they no longer had the opportunity to create their own kind of holistic view. They had more of a linear and not always useful view. So that impacted medicine, but there was this mountain of hope that everybody got behind, the mountain of hope that you're now referring to, that we never achieved, that somehow that would result in interoperability, global access, no matter where I am in the country or in the world. If I needed treatment, you'd be able to access that information and get a clear picture of me. We're not, as you say, we're not there. And there are initiatives underfoot, but there's human pressure around and proprietary pressure around these silos. So I don't necessarily have an answer, but I think you brought up a very fundamental and valid point. Does anyone else have a comment on that?
Value your opinion on extending that to the commercial structure of the industry and the impact then on the pressures that cause people then to make the investments. And it seems to me that it's not clear where the money is. Health is not really a production process. It's a bunch of cottage industries and individuals, and that makes it hard then to align some of these investments that have to happen. Do you think how do you see that playing out on some of these?
Well, I guess I relate to that question perhaps in a little different way than the aggregation of patient data and information, but really more from the standpoint of looking at some of the perverse incentives that occur in different areas of medicine that cause us to do different things. In my case, develop solutions, intermediary solutions, and make a lot of money off of intermediary solutions that at some point get sunset when the fundamentals get aligned properly, and et cetera. So I guess, in that sense, I feel hopeful from the standpoint, and we'll see how this all plays out. The whole healthcare the Affordable Care Act in the U.S., healthcare reform, if you will. Say what you will, to me, I think the quality of care has improved. I think value-based purchasing gets the focus on the right issue. It forces any of us to look at, is the cost and quality align? Is there value to what we're bringing? Et cetera. So I think those things are very positive steps. Again, I don't know what will happen to them going forward. But having been a healthcare executive previously in my life, I used to joke that we prayed for the sick and wounded and more of them. And now we've come around to the fundamentals, and I'll go to a healthcare conference with a bunch of CFOs, and we're watching empathy videos about the importance of empathy. I never thought I would see that in a CFO meeting. But there's a realization that, guess what? Empathy makes a big difference. There was a study done of folks with diabetes, and they were asked if to rate their physician on empathy. And for those who rated their physicians high in empathy, they had 40% fewer major complications associated with their diabetes. Interesting to think about, but now, at least in the States, most physicians have a computer screen between them and the patient, and their ability to connect and create that golden moment that can impact us is interfered with.
You spoke a lot about using this for treatment, but what about the artificial intelligence for preventative medicine? I guess, can you speak more about personalised medicine and precision medicine, the idea that that's the biggest market? Everyone who doesn't have a disease and doesn't really want one and wants to live as long as possible without a disease, how do you use it for that?
Well, I think it's estimated that 40% of us, at least in the U.S., will be required I should say, highly incentivized by our employers to wear wearable sensors and to give up our ongoing health information so that our employers and their agents can monitor our health and engage in preventive medicine. The wearables market is expected to expand. Right now, it's popular for athletes and fitness folks, but it's obviously being deployed also for the chronically ill. But from a preventive standpoint, that's one scenario. I'm sure others of you can think of many, whether it's prescriptive, sort of preemptive genotyping or other things that we could do that we can help identify what's going on with us much earlier. Some of us don't want to know, and some of us really want to know. So that's a market. That's kind of a consumer-driven market right now. Do you have any thoughts in that area that you're seeing?
Well, I guess the genomics is the biggest one, whereby, for a lot of disorders, and I'm interested in brain disorders, it's often at least 50%, and it's quantitative. I'm interested in the concept of the envirome. If you could quantify your total environmental exposures from conception through to old age and put it together with genome, then you've got a lot of useful information that could allow you to prevent diseases.
Yeah, great. Oftentimes at this point, you have some things on your mind that you might want to share with the audience. Maybe it's not a question. Maybe it's something that this stimulated or a perspective you have. Would anybody have anything, any further questions or things that they might want to bring up that we all ought to be thinking about in this area?
Has anyone looked at the issues of quality control in medicine? Does anyone know what quality control is? You have it in aerospace, aircraft industry, car industry, all kinds of manufacturing. It's a closed loop system. Whenever an error occurs, it's tracked down and corrected. That doesn't happen in medicine. It's very much dependent on the patient, whether the patient follows up. So what's your view on that?
I'm sure many of us would have there are definitely quality procedures. I'll give an example that maybe ties in with what you're saying that was very enlightening to me. When I started looking into the frequency of surgical patient errors, not procedural errors, but surgical patients who suffered some type of an error, I was really surprised to find that the frequency of surgical patient errors had not changed much in 30 years since the WHO checklist was rolled out. And then I started spending time in ORs, and I would see the circulating nurse who's responsible for going through the checklist, and the surgeon is still out doing whatever he's doing or she's doing, and the rest of the team is getting their stuff set up, and she's going through trying to get people's attention to do this checklist. So it was a human design and a human issue where nobody wants to listen to Betty or Bob go through a checklist again. If when you guys all got here and before any presentation was given, Luan required all of you to go through a checklist with him. And by the second or third time you came to one of these, you probably wouldn't want to come back because you don't want to go through a checklist, right? We hate checklists. But in scenarios where the WHO checklist has been followed consistently, whether it's a major academic medical center or it's a MASH unit, the frequency of surgical errors is much lower. So it was a human design issue, not unlike in aerospace. And so a lot of analogies were brought into the surgical area and the surgical cockpit based on aerospace. Some of it's cultural, and some of it is just fundamental human design. One of the things that we did, again, was develop a process whereby we brought animation and automation into the OR. So when it came time to activate the checklist, it wasn't a human that tried to get people's attention. She just pushed a button, and all of it, and immediately intercepted all the video screens, brought the lights up, turned off the surgeon's music, and used the room speakers to say, stop, time out, and then used that room the room became the surgical safety guide. And then as you went through the checklist, concurrently display the data that actually needs to be seen to accurately answer that, so to synchronize that, so that you have a cheat sheet and you're not having to shuffle or improvise. So that's one example of trying to look at using automation and room control and things like that that come from another industry. But the other comment I want to make about surgical errors, and if there's any surgeons in the room, I don't have to apologize for this because it's really in support of you. It's an incredibly courageous profession, and most of the errors that occur with surgical patients are not procedural errors. They're cognitive errors. The information wasn't readily available. It was an error in the setup. It was an error in pre-op. It was an error in post-op. Yeah, there are tragic things that occur when somebody rotates in and throws away the donor kidney by mistake and things like that, and that happened with one of our hospitals. But most of them are cognitive errors. And the root cause, and I get where you're going, the root cause of most surgical patient errors is lack of information-driven communication. They all boil down to lack of information-driven communication. So the more we can provide timely information and accurate information and then drive communication. If up here on the screen, if we're in the surgical suite and I'm the chief of surgery, and up here on the screen is all the information that we need to know about Mark, and we're starting the case, and one of you sees something of concern, it's a lot easier for you to tap me on the shoulder and point up at the screen than it is to try to tell me that I'm wrong. And so that's just one example of information-driven communication in a cultural environment where, again, the surgeon comes in. You know, they're the hero. They're the most courageous individual in that room. They're doing things that most of us would not attempt to do. And they get a lot of respect and regard for that, but at times, you know, they're not fallible, and their cognitive abilities are limited. They may be having an off day, who knows what. So bringing those things to bear, that's just one example that comes to mind in the area of surgical safety.
Hi, I think it's very relevant to what he was asking as well. So what if it's the other way around? So with the increased number of patient information, there's obviously an increased volume of information that the server, the data, the cloud, whatever it is, needs to function or need to assess. So that means therefore there's a data integrity and potentially security issues. So let's say you remove the cognitive factor and you're presented with an information that is actually wrong based on the error in the system. So it's not really the person analyzing it that got it wrong. It's actually the information that's been feeding into us is incorrect, or for some reason it just wasn't there in the first place. So what happens now? Who takes the accountability? And the second question is, from that point of view, how will the system or this technology will cope on that sort of scenarios where the people are not actually experienced anymore to perform their own analysis because they are they are learned or taught the way that they're always a machine-guided learning as opposed to actually getting the experience. So how do you think that would play out?
Physicians in the room, any thoughts on that? Because the reason I ask that is because physicians wind up at the butt of that process. You know, if others make errors in the process and the physicians are intervening based on inaccurate data. Comment? Did you have a comment?
Well, it's a related question and goes back to data again. I can see scenarios where you could do machine learning on trying to find errors and use it in that system. But I was more interested in a lot of data is provided to in your machine learning on it, and you provide these apps, advice, and so on. There has to be, I should imagine, particularly as we move into the more clinical areas, some certification of these recommendation devices. And that gets that back to the sources of data and the certification of data and how the actual learning algorithms were developed to provide a trust factor going into some of these quality advisors. And how far advanced is the US now at looking at those regulatory aspects of managing the input into these machine learning tools?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important area, and the lines are not entirely clear. Most of us prefer to play in the area of shared decision support and so from that standpoint, where we want to be providing, it's still a clinician-centric process, and it's the clinician's judgment. And what we're trying to do is organize and make usable information out of a bunch of data, but still rely on the clinician's judgment. So in the context of doing that, you know, it's a way of staying out of the line of fire in some ways that you're talking about, but at the same time, there's always the option that it could give misguidance. So in that regard, you know, there are certain platforms that actually, you know, that do have to be, they're deemed a medical advice device. They're certified by the FDA. They go through rigorous inspection and high accountability. But again, there's the opportunity for fallibility.
So, to a couple of centuries ago, if it hasn't got FDA on it,
Pardon?
if it hasn't got an FDA sticker, then it's snake oil. Is that where we're going to end up?
And it's what?
Then it's snake oil. Is that where we're going to end up?
No.
Particularly in the wellness area, because wellness is not regulated. I can produce an app on all sorts of data and say this is going to be good for you, and really it's nothing more than snake oil, unless I've got good grounding and evidence, which gets back then to the FDA or some sort of medical approval. So are we going to end up with something that everything's snake oil unless it has a certification of some sort?
I don't have an answer for that one. That's just, again, a very interesting observation. You know, one thing as I'm listening to this that I wanted to share that your question reminded me of is that the flip side of this is that those of you that are scientists and physicians, clinicians, researchers, and you do all of your good work to develop the most precise and personalized approach to Mark and whatever's going on with Mark. And then Mark doesn't follow what you're recommending. Mark doesn't take care of himself. Mark doesn't take his medication. Mark doesn't show up for treatment. Mark becomes now much more than ever. I think Mark is the wild card in medicine, and what we're all trying to look at is different ways to engage Mark. But Mark's level of engagement is the wild card in much of this as well, because we're much better at getting much more precise and developing a solution. But then if Mark doesn't participate, so that's a big challenge we're all facing now.
Would you join with me in thanking Mark for his presentation this evening? Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
That concludes the program for 2016. I'd like to say it's been a very good year for the network. I want to thank my partners for their incredible support in making this series possible and our supporters as well. So would you join with me in thanking them in the usual way? Thank you.